Hello and welcome to The Understudy, the channel that teaches you everything about musical theater. My name is Philippa, and today I will read from Broadway musicals, The 101 Greatest Shows of All Time by Ken Bloom and Frank Blasnick. To get the full version of the book, I recommend getting the physical copy as images and certain inserts from the book won't be displayed here. I do not own this material, I'm just reading from a place of entertainment and education, and I will not edit these audio recordings as I go, so you will get the unabridged version. Today I will go through the section O. Of Thee I Sing opened December 26th in 1931 at the Music Box Theatre with 441 performances. Produced by Sam H. Harris, music by George Gershwin and lyrics by Ira Gershwin. Book by George F. Kaufman and Maury Riskins. Music director Charles Previn, orchestrations by Robert Russell Bennett and William Daly, staged by George S. Kaufman, choreographed by Chester Hale, settings by Joe Meisner, costumes by Charles Lemaire. Synopsis: John P. Wintergreen and his running mate Alexander Throttlebottom campaign for the White House on the Love platform. Wintergreen is in love with simple Mary Turner, and he handedly wins the election. Then scandal hits. A beauty contest winner accuses him of alienation of affection, and the scandal rocks the White House. But by the end of the evening, all is well, after Mary Turner reveals she's about to give birth to twins. The impeachment is called off, and the country is restored to glory. Cast: Louis Lipman, Sid Mann, Francis X. Gilhooly, Harold Moffat, Arnold Fulton, Dudley Clements, Senator Robert E. Lyons, George E. Mack, Senator Carvey Jones, Edward H. Robbins, Alexander Throttlebottom, Victor Moore, John P. Wintergreen, William Gaxton, Sam Jenkins, George Murphy, Diana Devereaux, Grace Brinkley, Mary Turner, Louise Morgan, Miss Benson, June O'Dea, the Chief Justice, Ralph Riggs, the French Ambassador, Florence Ames. Here are some legendary musical comedy quotes, classic quips that have entered into the realm of legend. We can't vouch that all of them are true, nor would we swear that the words are exactly right, but they are truly witty, and any musical comedy aficionado knows most of them. Interestingly, many have to do with Rodgers and Hammerstein, together and apart. No legs, no jokes, no chance is ascribed to Mike Todd, who left at the first act of Away We Go in New Haven. The show became Oklahoma. Can you draw sweet water from a foul well? Wondered Brooks Atkinson in the New York Times after the opening of Pal Joey. The world of woozy song was how critic Kenneth Tynan summed up Rodgers and Hammerstein's Flower Drum Song. When asked about how he liked Rodgers and Hammerstein, Cole Porter replied that they were fine, dryly adding, "If you can imagine it taking two men to write one song." When a woman gushed to Mrs. Jerome Kern how much she admired Old Man River, Mrs. Hammerstein, standing nearby, commented, "My husband wrote Old Man River. Her husband wrote Dum 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 Dum." Not all famous quotes revolve around Rodgers and Hammerstein, of course. Throw it away and keep the store open nights, suggested Wag Cy Howard to producer Alfred Bloomingdale after seeing Allah Be Praised. During tryouts of Guys and Dolls, Frank Loesser wanted to reprise songs from the first act in the second. George S. Kaufman, the director, responded, "I'll let you reprise the songs if I can reprise the jokes." Kaufman also quipped, "Satire is what closes on Saturday night." The show to which he was referring was the Gershwins of Thee I Sing, and, for once, the genius Kaufman was wrong. So wrong, in fact, that Of Thee I Sing enjoyed the longest run of any book musical that opened in the 1930s. Kaufman can't quite be blamed, as history seemed to support his view, but Of Thee I Sing wasn't your usual satire. The book, by Maury Riskind and Kaufman himself, was the first to lampoon the Congress, Supreme Court, the presidency, and that most sacrosanct of American institutions, motherhood. The show was unique in other ways too, owning much to the Gilbert and Sullivan school of writing, with many recitative passages and choral commentary. As Ira himself explained, in the show, there are no verse and chorus songs. There is a sort of recitative running along, and lots of finales and finalettos. That structure was so innately theatrical, it made the satire easy for audiences to swallow. The characterizations were broad and the plot ridiculous, yet the barbs and shafts of the writers still hit their marks. A true comic opera, Of Thee I Sing owed as much to Breck and Will, though a good deal sillier and more affectionate than their work, as to Gilbert and Sullivan. Initially, there was nervousness on parts of the creators and the cast, thinking back to the era in which Of Thee I Sing flourished. Patriotism and a belief in the American way of life was high. The country was in a depression and needed to believe that their government would pull them through. And while there had been some precedents to political satire, marking Twain and, in more recent times, Will Rogers laconically pointing up idiocies in the democratic society. The presidency, not to mention the vice presidency, was held in high regard, almost above satire. The show's stars, William Gaxton and Victor Moore, seriously worried whether they would get in trouble with the government for their somewhat disrespectful characterizations of the country's leaders. But they needn't worry, for Of Thee I Sing was a smash hit, and forevermore the office of the vice president would be seen as somewhat of a joke. In fact, the show became one of the few musicals to inspire a sequel, Let Them Eat Cake. That show didn't achieve the success of its predecessor. Perhaps the public was tired of the joke, or maybe the writers became overly confident. But the relative failure of Let Them Eat Cake certainly does nothing to diminish the great accomplishment of Thee I Sing. George S. Kaufman. Known as one of the greatest playwrights of the 20th century, George S. Kaufman was responsible for some of the most important comedies of the 1930s and 40s, collaborating with other legendary wits Moss Hart and Edna Ferber on such plays as The Royal Family, 1927, Once in a Lifetime, 1930, Merrily We Roll Along, 1934, and The Man Who Came to Dinner, 1939, all of which have been musicalized, as well as Dinner at 8, 1932, The Stage Door, 1936, The Solid Gold Cadillac, 1953, all of which undoubtedly be musicalized someday. Kaufman also wrote or co-wrote the books for many musicals, including Animal Crackers, 1928, The Bandwagon, 1931, Of Thee I Sing, I'd Rather Be Right, Of Thee I Sing, I'd Rather Be Right, 1937, The Flops, Hollywood Pinafore, 1945, and Park Avenue, 1945, and his last, Silk Stockings, in 1955. A successful director of many of his own plays, Kaufman also staged the original productions of other playwrights' work, with such varied credits as The Front Page, 1928, Of Mice and Men, 1937, My Sister Eileen, 1945, and the musical Guys and Dolls, 1950. Oh Boy opened February 20th, 1917, at the Princess Theatre with 463 performances. Produced by William Ellett and F. Ray Comstock, staged by Edward Royce, music by Jerome Kern, book by Guy Bolton and P.G. Wodehouse, and lyrics by Guy Bolton and P.G. Wodehouse. Orchestra under the direction of Max Hirschfeld. Orchestrations by Frank Sadler, scenery design by D.M. Aiken, and costume design by Fabe C. Synopsis. George and his new wife, Lou Ellen, returned to George's house on Long Island after their honeymoon, only to find a party going on. Because they eloped, Lou Ellen's parents doesn't yet know that they were married, and, to ease telling them, the couple decides to separate till the parents can be informed. Once Lou Ellen has left George's bedroom, in through the window comes zany actress, is there any other kind, Jackie Sampson, escaping from a lecherous judge down below. Much madcap farce follows, as Jackie is forced to disguise herself as George's Quaker aunt and then his wife. Cast: Jane Packard, Marion Davies, Polly Andrus, Justin Johnstone, Jim Marvin, Hal Ford, George Budd, Tom Powers, Lou Ellen Carter, Mary Carroll, Jackie Sampson, Anna Wheaton, Judge Daniel Carter, Frank McGinn, Miss Penelope Budd, Edna May Oliver. The team of Jerome Kern, P.D. Wodehouse, and Guy Bolton created a new form of American theater with the Princess Theater shows, aptly named after the intimate venue in which they were presented. The third Princess Theater musicals and the third longest running book musical of the teens was Oh Boy. The show followed Bolton and Kern's Nobody Home and Very Good Eddie, with Wodehouse joining the team for the first time. Like other princess musicals, simple and unpretentious with one setting for the first act and another for the second, Oh Boy eschewed exotic foreign locales and used modern American settings and themes. These early shows were musicalized comedies of manners featuring romantic and marital mix-ups and misunderstandings. The princess shows were another step forward in the true integration of song and story. While there were no interpolated speciality numbers or widely off-base songs, there was room for the occasional piece of special material somewhat subtly jammed into the plot. And if the characters were sometimes more like caricatures, we all were essentially good people, dutiful, playing the roles of society demanded. Above all, the tone and style of the show was unwavering, eschewing overly energetic farce and overworked emotions. Oh Boy represented the transition from haphazard musicals of the past to the newer, more methodical, modern musical comedy. Though tertiary character names illustrate the old-time penchant for puns. Sheila Rive, Ina Ford, Annie Old, Knight B, Ava Little, Phil Osophy, Hugo Cassiet. The libretto is remarkably pun-free, and plot is natural and unforced. Charm was uppermost in the creator's mind, so they designed an evening in which the audience could relax, have a few laughs, feel slightly superior to these silly undertakings on stage, and smile along with the simple, melodic, lyrically witty, but undermanding songs. The hit song of the show proved to be one of Kern's most beautiful and enduring works, Till the Clouds Roll By. The heartfelt, romantic sentiment of the lyrics is perfectly matched to the lilting, rolling melody. Simplicity, a good sense of clean fun, and tender emotions seem a world away from today's musical theater. While its plot might seem a bit silly to today's audiences, we would be wise to take a tip from Bolton, Wodehouse, and Kern, and their adherence to honest, non-ironic, hardworking theater. Princess Theater. While the New Amsterdam Theater is closely associated with the Ziegfeld Follies, only one theater is noted for its importance in the theatrical movement. That theater is the tiny, intimate Princess Theater, which was located at 104 West and 39th Street. Its long-term failure to attract worthy tenants was resolved during a series of productions that came known as the Princess Theater shows, thus ensuring the Princess Theater an important role in the history of American musical. The 299-seat house was built nearby the immense Metropolitan Opera House. The Princess presented a simple interior design, with 14 rows of seats in the orchestra section and 4 boxes. After it hosted a series of failures, agent Elizabeth Marbury was asked to help book the space. She represented many of the best-known playwrights, and her business sense was legendary. She was the first agent to get her playwrights a percentage of the gross receipts. Marbury suggested small, intimate musicals for the Princess stage, but it was generally assumed that established writers wouldn't work for such minuscule monetary returns. So, Marbury approached the young Jerome Kern, who suggested teaming with Guy Bolton. Their series of historic and popular shows, later in collaboration with P.G. Wodehouse, changed the course of the American musical. Following their presentations, the theater again slipped into hard times, changing names several times, even being transformed into a movie house. Fame came again to the Princess in 1937, renamed the Labor Stage, with opening of Pins and Needles, a topical review from the GWU, International Ladies Garment Worker Union. The show played almost 1,000 performances at the theater before moving. In June of 1955, the historic theater was razed to make room for an office building. Off-Broadway Part 2. In the summer of 1975 was the juggernaut of A Chorus Line kicked its way uptown to a new home at the Schubert Theater on Broadway. The landscape of off-Broadway changed forever. Instead of being the permanent home of intimate, smaller cast shows, off-Broadway would become a testing ground where offbeat shows with commercial aspirations could workshop and develop. Soon, every savvy producer in town would be scouting off-Broadway for a potential blockbuster. The birthplace of A Chorus Line, Joseph Papp's Public Theater, had continued to produce musicals over the last 35 years with mixed results. As predictably, not every idea has proven as golden as those chorus line top hats. For every bring in the noise, bring in the funk, there was an Umbrellas of Cherbourg, a stage version of the 1964 Michael Legrand movie musical. And an Up Against It, and produced a script by Joe Orton, originally written for the Beatles with a score added by Todd Rundgren, or Radiant Baby, a biomusical of the life of a pop artist, Keith Haring. All shows that failed to live up to their considerable hype. One of the most successful musicals in the public history never trained its eye on the Great White Way. Gretchen Grier and Nancy Ford's I'm Getting My Act Together and Taking It on the Road. A combination concert and women's empowering meeting, the show was very much of its time, tapping into the spirit of the blossoming women's movement, with an eclectic score combining pop rock tunes with theater songs such as Smile and Old Friend, a terrific saloon song that became a cabaret staple. The show played to sold-out houses for almost 3 years and became the only bona fide smash for Cryer and Ford, one of our few female songwriting teams. Like the most successful show, I'm Getting My Act Together, spawned other liberating musicals that cater to female audience, to the point where a matinee lady court charred her advancing age. I Can't Keep Running in Place, actually set in a women's assertiveness workshop, Angry Housewives, Cut the Ribbons, and Menopause the Musical. What's next? Osteoporosis, the oratorio. In 1982, a show opened at the tiny WPA Theater that went on to become one of the best-known and most widely produced musical comedies for the last 30 years. Based on the 1960 Roger Corman movie, Little Shop of Horrors was a knowing spoof of B-horror movies in the same spirit Little Mary Sunshine, which has scoured the ever-so-earnest world of operetta 20 years earlier. Composer Alan Menken and lyricist book writer Howard Ashman cagily melded the sounds of doo-wop, girl group Motown, and the pure musical comedy to create a piece that was comfortably familiar yet bracingly original. Even its pastiche numbers, especially the classic Somewhere That's Green, as sung by star Ellen Greene in the matchless performance, sounded fresh. As in the case of I'm Getting My Act Together, there was the inevitable flood of Little Shop knockoffs, ranging from the amusing Return to the Forbidden Planet, The Toxic Avenger, to the truly rotten Zombie Prom and Imperfect Chemistry. An especially clever show in the Little Shop vein was 2001's Bat Boy the Musical, ripped from the Believe It or Not pages of the Weekly World News, and containing 2 star-making performances by Devon May in the title role and Caitlin Hopkins in the all-too-accommodating Donna Reed-esque mother. Another hit that triggered an avalanche of imitations was the successful 4-man revue Forever Played, which became a goldmine for writers Stuart Ross and music and vocal arranger James Raitt. Once played, settled into a long run at the cabaret space at Steve McCross in 1990, the conceit of a concert by a fictional retro singing group became fertile ground for musical creators. Along came Swing Time Canteen, the Taffetas, the Cardigans, the Marvelous Wonderettes, G.I. Jukebox, and Pete and Kelly, a riff of the Panther medley of Steve Lawrence and Edie Jorm. In the same vein, but not much too original to lump in with played facsimiles, was Altar Boys, which depicted the final concert of a fictional Christian boy band, the culmination of their Raise the Praise tour, with an original score and hilarious choreography a la New Kids on the Block and the Backstreet Boys. These boys ran for almost 5 years, folding religion into the receipt of the show in such a non-judgmental way that we might be perceived as sacrilegious by some, only broadened its appeal. In the 1980s and 90s, gay theatergoers and those with a highly involved camp aesthetic were treated to shows such as Pagnant Ruthless, a wickedly funny spoof of The Bad Seed, with a soup con of Gypsy thrown in for good measure, Xana Don't, Miss Gulch Returns, a one-woman confessional from the most misunderstood characters in The Wizard of Oz, written and performed by musical director-composer Fred Barton, Whoop-De-Doo, and When Pigs Fly, creations of Mark Waldrop and the late writer-costume designer Howard Crabtree, and the ultimate gimmick show, Naked Boys Singing. No explanation necessary. All of these proved over-the-top hits. For the AARP crowd, there was Taking My Turn and My Old Friends. For sport fans, Golf, the musical, and Diamonds, a 1984 baseball review directed by Hal Prince. Package Theater Tour, anyone? Roman Catholics proved a responsive target audience as Nonsense took anyone who went to the parochial school back to the days of Rulers Across Knuckles, Queen of the May, and the Macaroni and Cheese Fridays. Those wacky nuns became a multi-million-dollar cottage industry for author Dan Goggin, and he constantly reinvented the brand, licensing Nonsense in its many sequels all over the world. Following up titles included Nonsense 2, The Second Coming, Sister Amnesia Country Western Nonsense Jamboree, and the Acme Interfaith Crossmaking Meshuggah Nuns. It's enough to make you yearn to see Fiddler on the Roof starring James Gandolfini. Taylor made for what is affectionately called the Bridge and Tunnel crowd from New Jersey, Long Island, and Westchester County was I Love You, You're Perfect Now Change, which opened at the West Side Theater in 1997. Stayed for 11 years. Another worldwide sensation, the Beijing company performing in Mandarin, played a 10-week stand during the show's New York run. I Love You, You're Perfect Now Change, the brainchild of composer Jimmy Roberts and writer Joe DiPietro, was a series of vignettes and songs showering the pitfalls and pratfalls of male-female relationships. From blind date to parenthood, from proposal to divorce. Songbook reviews featuring the work a particular composer have been a staple of off-Broadway theater since the day of Jacques Brel is alive and well and living in Paris. Yet one of the best known of the genre was not officially considered off-Broadway at all. Starting Here, Starting Now, which ran at the Barbaran restaurant in 1977. Other than the title song, What About Today, and Autumn, which had been recorded by Barbra Streisand, Starting Here, Starting Now was a showcase of the unknown theater songs of David Shire and Richard Maltby, woven into fast-moving evening for the trio of knockout performers. Looking back, it's shocking that Starting Here, Starting Now only ran for 120 performances, as its cast album, recording by RCA, became a hit, and the show became a staple of regional, college, and community theaters. As many of their songs were like mini monologues, numbers such as Crossword Puzzle, I Think I Want to Remember Today, and I Don't Remember Christmas were among the top 10 audition songs for over a decade. In the same way that off-Broadway in the 1950s and 60s was the training ground for writing teams such as Maltby and Shire, Strauss and Adams, and Schmitz and Jones, the 1990s marked the arrival of composers and lyricists that would soon be working their way to Broadway. In recent years, such writers as Giannini Tesori, Violet, Andrew Lippa, John and Jen, The Wild Party, and Michael John LaChuisa, Petrified Prince, Hello Again, First Lady Suite, all received the initial acclaim that they needed to spur their careers onwards and upward. One of the most prolific contemporary teams, Stephen Flaherty and Lynn Ahrens, started off Broadway with the delightful 1988 murder mystery musical Lucky Stiff, yet have never truly abandoned their small-scale roots. After hitting Broadway with the transfer of their Caribbean-influenced Once on This Island, Flaherty and Ahrens greatly widened their scope for Ragtime, one of the most sweeping epic musicals of the last 30 years. Nevertheless, they continue to work with smaller, more intimate stories as well. Through their continuing relationship with Lincoln Center Theatre, the team has produced Desarose, The Glorious Age, and A Man of No Importance, based on the 1994 Albert Finney film and one of the most touching chamber musicals of the last decade. As the bar was raised and musical theater creators searched for challenging new subject matter, Brain Tumors, A New Brain, Strokes, Wings, AIDS, Falsetto Land, The Last Session, and Eating Disorders, Normal, became the du jour topics to sing and dance about. Gender reassignment was tackled not once, but twice, disastrously in a completely misbegotten 1987 musical, The Knife, starring Mandy Patinkin, and brilliantly in the smash 1998 in Hedwig and the Angry Inch. Starring the genius John Cameron Mitchell and written by him with composer Stephen Trask, this rock concert roller coaster ride told the mesmerizing story of a boy transported from humble beginnings in East Berlin to the life of a glam rock star after a botched sex change operation. As unpromising as that might sound, the show was darkly funny, wildly inventive, and ultimately deeply moving. On paper, these ideas might seem the result of a cynical game of one-upmanship among writers reaching for the most unlikely subject matter imaginable. But, as in the case of that composer who wrote about a barber who slashes people's throats and grinds them into pies, it's all in the how. Such potential toe-tappers as the story of murderers Leopold and Loeb, Thrill Me, The Diary of Anne Frank, Yours Anne, and the 1925 attempt rescue and media circus surrounding trapped caves explorer Floyd Collins were all attempted. And while a musicalized Anne Frank may seem particularly misguided, how exactly can people hiding from their lives in a secret annex break into song and dance? Floyd Collins once again proved that, in the right hands, even tricky material can sing, and sing magnificently. The debut musical of composer Adam Guettel and its score, especially such stunning theater songs as Daybreak and How Glory Goes, showed the promise later realized in his Broadway musical, The Light in the Piazza. Over the last decade, the off-Broadway musical has seemed to be dying a slow death as economies made it increasingly difficult for producers to turn a profit with an untried title in a small venue. Many shows that would have previously been staged off-Broadway, such as The Story of My Life, Amour, and Glory Days, have opted to roll the dice and go straight to Broadway, and failed to find the substantial audience needed to survive there. The result is an off-Broadway where the vast majority of groundbreaking work originates at subscriber-sustained, not-for-profit theater companies, such as Playwright Horizons, The Vineyard, and The Public. One of the most acclaimed new musicals of the 2000s, Next to Normal, dealing with a mother's bipolar disorder, her suicide attempt, and her subsequent shock therapy, yep, another of those feel-good shows, began its commercial life at the non-profit Second Stage Theater, later transferring to Broadway, finding a huge audience and winning the 2009 Pulitzer Prize for Drama. Ironically, the Broadway transfer, the goal of almost every new off-Broadway musical since A Chorus Line hit the jackpot, has come full circle. One of the most clever and submersive musicals of the last decade, Avenue Q, which began its life in New York at the Vineyard Theater, has recently transferred back off-Broadway to the multi-theater complex New World stages. After a successful 6-year run at the Golden Theater with a detour to Las Vegas. To quote the title of the very successful off-Broadway Candor and Ebb review, "And the world goes round." Gerald Alessandrini and Forbidden Broadway. The clever man of the most successful phenomenon in off-Broadway history, Gerald Alessandrini, is a rarity in the modern theater, a parodist. Although reviews from the 1930s through the 1960s, both on and off Broadway, regularly included sketches and blackout scenes with lampooning fads, films, celebrities, and popular music. The rise of the weekly television variety shows, from Your Show of Shows through The Carol Burnett Show and Saturday Night Live, pretty much nailed the coffin shut on the theatrical musical comedy review. A solo humorist such as Will Rogers could easily incorporate the day's events into his solo act, but a larger-scale show couldn't possibly keep up with the cutting-edge humor as well as television could. Ironically, it was not long after Burnett's show left the air, and other shows conceived around such stars as Marilyn Tyler Moore had quickly flopped, that Gerald Alessandrini, along with collaborator Philip George, rejuvenated the concept of live musical parody with an evening of spoofs of Broadway musicals and performances in January 1982. And after a rave review from critic Rex Reed, word of mouth began to spread. Within a month, stars such as Ethel Merman, Mary Martin, and Carol Channing, who was not spoofed in the original show but demanded and soon got her own parody, came, and their mere presence gave the show a stamp of approval. Whereas such erudite types as Harold Prince and Stephen Sondheim became longtime fans, not every subject was thrilled. Lauren Bacall and lyricist Betty Comden and Adolph Green were among the very few celebrities that showed displeasure. Bacall's nose was out of joint from the parody of her Woman of the Year showstopper One of the Boys with the new lyrics, "I'm one of the girls who sing like a boy." While Comden and Green asked Alessandrini to remove a Will Rogers Follies parody titled Swill-O-Mania. And for over 15 years, Andrew Lloyd Webber refused to allow his music to be used by the show, so the creators were forced to come up with thinly veiled parodies. Ultimately, he realized that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery and relented. The original production ran for over 5 years with frequent updates, and by 1988, virtually every season brought a new edition of Forbidden Broadway. Replacement casts, including the future Broadway stalwarts Jason Alexander, Aaron Morrison, Brad Oscar, Dee Hoyte, Davis Gaines, Brian Batt, Christine Petty, Daniel Raychard, Donna English, Michael McGrath, Barbara Walsh, Lee Hawking, and Jason Gray. Various incarnations of the show have won a Tony, an Obie, and 4 Drama Desk Awards. As the Broadway musical has become more and more self-referential, it's difficult to show spoofs such as Pamela, Urinetown, and Young Frankenstein, and its stars less iconic than a Merman or Channing. Forbidden Broadway's subjects have become more elusive. As of 2010, the voice of Forbidden Broadway has been silent for more than a year, but we wouldn't count it out. The minute Broadway provides a few new juicy targets, Alessandrini will undoubtedly begin sharpening his knife again. Richard Maltby and David Shire. The talented songwriters Richard Maltby and David Shire have been writing together for the musical theater for over 50 years. Beginning their collaboration while students at Yale, where they wrote the musicals Cyrano and Grand Tour, their first off-Broadway show, The Sap of Life, opened in 1961. They then went on to write How Do You Do, I Love You, about a computer dating and starring Phyllis Newman, which played the summer tent circuit in 1967. Followed by Love Match, based on the life of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, which closed in Los Angeles in 1968. The Off-Broadway Revue, Starting Here, Starting Now, finally introduced their wonderful catalog of theater songs to a wide audience, and the team reached Broadway with their 1983 cult musical Baby. Several of the songs unused in Baby found their way into their second off-Broadway songbook, Closer Than Ever, and they made a return to Broadway in 1996 with the family-friendly Big. Shire began his career playing in the pits of such Broadway shows as Funny Girl, also accompanying and arranging music for several Barbra Streisand's early television specials. He wrote the amazing dance music for the electrifying Tick-Tock number in Stephen Sondheim's Company, and began his film career with a score for then brother-in-law Francis Ford Coppola's film The Conversation. Shire wrote an Oscar for composing It Goes Like It Goes for the film Norma Ray, and was nominated that same year for one of the most beautiful melodies of his career, I'll Never Say Goodbye, from The Promise. He has earned 5 Emmy nominations for his television scores, including those for Sarah, Plain and Tall, and The Women of Brewster Place, and he composed the infectious There's a New Girl in Town theme song for the sitcom Alice. Although Shire has not written a score for the theater without his writing partner, Maltby, also a creator of the cryptic crosswords for Harper's Magazine, is musical theater's version of a Renaissance man, with a versatile career on the Broadway stage as conceiver, director, book writer, and lyricist. He wrote 2 Tony Awards for conceiving and directing the Smash Fats Waller musical revue Ain't Misbehavin', director and co-lyricist for the Broadway production of Song and Dance, and co-lyricist for the long-running Miss Saigon. After writing to Charles Strauss music for the legendary disaster Nick and Nora, Maltby co-conceived and directed a second Tony Award-winning revue, Fosse. Amazingly, Maltby and Shire are both the sons of orchestra leaders, and their song, If I Sing, written specifically for Closer Than Ever, and sung by a son of an aging father, is one of the most deeply personal and touching of all of their work. Their latest musical, Take Flight, examines the life of the Wright brothers, Amelia Earhart and Charles Lindbergh, and has had several workshops and regional productions. Its 2007 London premiere finally generated a cast album. OK opened November 8th in 1926 at the Imperial Theatre with 256 performances. Produced by Alex A. Aarons and Vinton Friedley. Book by Guy Bolton and P.G. Wodehouse. Music by George Gershwin and lyrics by Ira Gershwin. Based on the play La Presidente by Maurice Henquin and Pierre Weber. Orchestra under the direction of William Daly. Staged by John Hardwood, musical staging by Sammy Lee. Scenic design by John Wenger, costumes designed by Hattie Carnegie Brooks Costume Company. Synopsis. It's the Roaring Twenties and prohibition is rampant throughout the land. So, by the way, is bootlegging, and unbeknownst to him, Jimmy Walker's Long Island estate is being used to stash illegal liquor. The ringleaders of this operation are the Duke of Durham and his sister, Lady Kay, aided and abetted by the rather dim bulbs Story McKee and Larry Potter. Jimmy returns home from his honeymoon with his new wife, Constance, the daughter of a judge, naturally, but unfortunately for the newlyweds, there's a slight problem with the legality of the marriage. Jimmy has neglected to divorce his first wife. Now wed to a bigamist, Constance flees to a hotel for the night. Kay accidentally enters Jimmy's bedroom in search of the hooch. Much confusion of identities occur. Kay appears in disguise, both as a maid and Jimmy Cockney's wife. But true to form, Jimmy ends up with Kay. Cast: Molly Morse, Betty Compton. The Duke, Gerald Oliver Smith. Larry Potter, Harold Dixon. Phil Ruxton, Marion Fairbanks. Dolly Ruxton, Madeline Fairbanks. Shorty McGee, Victor Moore. Jimmy Winter, Oscar Shaw. Kay, Gertrude Lawrence. May, Constant Carpenter. The musical comedy OK is utterly conventional yet thoroughly enchanting. In the tradition of a bygone era, the songwriters wrote the entire score before the librettists ever put pen to paper. In fact, going into the project, all the Gershwins knew was that rising star Gertrude Lawrence would headline. It's no surprise then that no fewer than 8 songs were dropped before the show made it to New York. After all, once the Gershwins were confronted with what could loosely be called a plot, some of the pre-libretto songs just couldn't be shoehorned into P.G. Wodehouse and Guy Bolton's libretto. Set among the world of bootleggers and run-runners, plucked directly from the headlines. The characters, in addition to Lauren's title character, included her British fop of a brother, a pompous, blustering judge, and a never-do-well playboy. In the role of the bumbling comic, a staple in most 20s and 30s musical comedies, beloved character man Victor Moore, famous for his stuttering slow-motion simplicity, was hired. Co-producer Vinton Friedley was so unsure of Moore's slow delivery. However, he had two comics standing by in Philadelphia should Moore hold up the farcical proceedings. Of course, it wasn't necessary, for Moore was a delight. Ahrens and Friedley saw OK as a Princess Theater type show, single-setting, farcical goings on, and only the slightest attempt to integrate song and story. Although they provided Broadway-sized trappings, including a female chorus and a troupe of dancers. The main draws of most 20s musical were their stars and their songs. In this case, anyway, expectations were overwhelmingly surpassed, for although Gertrude Lawrence had made quite a splash in the Andre Charlotte revues of 1924 and 1925, she became the toast of New York as the zany Kay. Note, Guy Bolton always claimed he discovered Lawrence performing in a London revue, improbably titled Rats. Bolton immediately spotted her appeal and sent her a note, promising to write a show especially around her talents. As for the score, it contained marvelous, jaunty tunes in the typical Gershwin manner. But the big hit of the show, Someone to Watch Over Me, was exemplary in its perfectly simple staging, with Lawrence plaintively singing the jazzy yet tender plea to a rag doll that George Gershwin had found in Philadelphia toy store window. It stopped the show cold, becoming one of Gershwin's best-loved standards. OK might have been one of the finest of 20s musicals, but it was also to be one of the last of its kind. For just over the theatrical horizon, a miracle was about to occur on the stage of the Ziegfeld Theater. After Showboat, musical theater would never quite be the same, and shows like OK would become quaint reminders of musical comedy with nothing more on its pretty little minds than bumbling comics, stuttering English asses, and the occasional beautiful lovelorn ballad. Bolton and Wodehouse. Guy Bolton, P.G. Wodehouse, and Jerome Kern comprised the most celebrated musical theater trio in the early years. While Kern's many accomplishments in musical theater are fondly recalled, many people have no idea the importance of Bolton and Wodehouse. The former enjoyed a long life in theater from his first show, The Rule of Three, in 1914, to his last, Anya, in 1965. Along the way, he wrote many musicals and plays, many of which have been recently revived or adapted, including Very Good Eddie, The 5 O'Clock Girl, Anything Goes, and OK. And the hit Crazy for You was based on his original work. P.G. Wodehouse's musical career is forgotten, largely because of the great number of other writings he produced. He was, however, responsible for the libretti of almost 40 musical comedies, the most successful of which were written in collaboration with Bolton and Kern for the tiny Princess Theater. Wodehouse's lyrics were the first to use popular slang and speech patterns rather than poetic musings, and made inroads to integrating songs into plots that were less idiotic than usual. Wodehouse was the most influential of all early lyricists, with many later greats citing him as their inspiration. Gertrude Lawrence. Gertrude Lawrence had it, that indefinable, unteachable, ineffable quality that separates a superstar from a competent, solid performer. An unlikely person to make her fame in musicals, she was an average dancer and highly pitchy as a singer. But like Marilyn Miller, Gertie would stand center stage, beam, and any vocal deficiencies were immaterial. Coming to the States with Beatrice Lillie and Andre Charlotte's review of 1924, Lawrence walked off with the show and became an overnight sensation to American audiences with her song Parisian Pierrot and Limehouse Blues. Subsequently, the Gershwins tapped her to play the lead in OK, introducing Do 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 and Someone to Watch Over Me. A wonderful stage comedienne, she became a beloved star, forever associated with Noel Coward after their sensational pairings in Private Lives and Tonight at 8:30. The leading the kind of dramatic personal life one imagines most actresses lead, she was considered flighty, self-centered, and undependable by those who worked with her. But none of that matters to audiences. After playing the searching Liza Elliott in Lady in the Dark, Rodgers and Hammerstein wrote the role of Anna Leonowens in The King and I at her request. It should have been her greatest triumph, a role she could have played for years. Not long into the run, however, it became apparent that Lawrence was seriously ill, and when she finally left the show, her decline was rapid. She died from cancer within a few weeks. Backstage. When Ira Gershwin was laid up in the hospital for an emergency appendectomy during production, lyricist Howard Dietz came to the rescue and contributed lyrics to the title song and 3 others in the score, plus the title to Someone to Watch Over Me. Gertrude Lawrence, appearing in the States in her first book musical, was the first English woman to originate a role in American musical prior to its traveling to the West End. Lawrence didn't make her entrance in OK until 40 minutes into the first act. Oklahoma opened March 31st, 1943 at the St. James Theatre with 2,212 performances. Produced by the Theatre Guild, music by Richard Rodgers, and book and lyrics by Oscar Hammerstein, based on the play Green Grow the Lilacs by Lynn Riggs. Musical director, Jay Blackton. Musical orchestrated by Russell Bennett. Directed by Ruben Mamoulian. Choreographed by Agnes DeMille. Scenic design by Lemuel Ayers. Costume design by Miles White. Synopsis. Aunt Eller Murphy has 2 ranch hands, Curly and Judd Fry, both of whom have taken a liking to Eller's niece, Lori. Curly is handsome and virile. Judd is a lonely, angry misfit. Lori uses Judd in order to make Curly jealous, giving Judd reasons to believe that he has a chance with the young farm girl. With the assist of a Surrey with fringe on top, Curly wins over Lori and they are married. Judd picks a fight with Curly, during which Judd falls on his knife and is killed. After a trial lasting a few sentences, Curly is exonerated and ranchers and cowmen join together to celebrate the new state of Oklahoma. Cast. Curly, Alfred Drake. Lori, Joan Roberts. Ali Highcomb, Joseph Beloff. Judd Fry, Howard Da Silva. Will Parker, Lee Dixon. Aunt Eller, Betty Gard. Ado Annie Carnes, Celeste Holm. Jess Dream Judd. George Church, Aggie and Dream Child. Bambi Lynn. Chalmers and Dream Curly. Mark Platt. Dream Lori. Catherine Sergava. Andrew Carnes. Ralph Riggs. Changes in the musical theater form came fast and furious in the 1940s. This was mainly due to the successful run of Rodgers and Hammerstein shows, beginning in 1943 with the groundbreaking Oklahoma. In actuality, however, Oklahoma wasn't as revolutionary a triumph as Hammerstein and Kern's Showboat 1927. Structurally speaking, Oklahoma and most of Rodgers and Hammerstein's shows were essentially operettas, though more mature and sophisticated, better integrated, and with more complex characterizations than the usual light-hearted operetta fare. People are often killed or die in Rodgers and Hammerstein shows. Judd is killed in Oklahoma, Billy commits suicide in Carousel, Lieutenant Cable is killed in South Pacific, and the King dies in The King and I. All of their shows share a strong sense of community, and characters must strive for happiness and overcome obstacles in order to reach their goals. Sometimes, as is the case for cases of Judd Fry, Cable, and Tupton, the happiness remains elusive. The greatest integrations of book, music, and dance have been explored by both writers prior to joining forces. Many of their shows, Oklahoma, Carousel, Allegro, The King and I, and even Flower Drummer Song, included a lengthy ballet, usually psychological in nature and always heavily metaphoric. In addition, the shows tend to be heavily weighted toward the first act with a lighter, shorter second act. The Rodgers and Hammerstein formula further demanded a main romantic couple, with the secondary subplot built around a humorous couple. There was often an Earth mother figure, such as Aunt Eller in Oklahoma, Nettie Fowler in Carousel, and the grandmother in Allegro, Fauna in Pipe Dream, and the Mother Superior in The Sound of Music. In fact, a repertory company could easily produce a season of Rodgers and Hammerstein shows utilizing one group of actors who could fit all of the roles. Some of the shows by other than successfully followed the Rodgers and Hammerstein formula were Brigadoon, 1947, with 3 couples, Bloomer Girl, 1944, Phineas Rainbow, 1947, and Kiss Me Kate, 1948. But these were works by up-and-coming heavyweights, in the case of Lerner and Loewe, or Rodgers and Hammerstein's contemporaries reinventing themselves, in the case of Cole Porter. Just following the formula didn't guarantee you success, and there were plenty of derivative flops. Unlike many other writers, Rodgers and Hammerstein believed in the essential humanity of their characters. They never wrote a part purely for comedy's sake, or treated their characters lightly or with disdain. They respected the villains and the comic leads alike, loving them for their mistakes as well as their triumphs, allowing their characters an unusual depth and three-dimensionality. The king is at once a barbarian by our standards, and an intelligent ruler who cares about his country and people. Billy Bigelow goes down the wrong road because he cares so much for his wife and unborn child. The audience can even emphasize with poor Judd, isolated in his lonely room with his girly pictures. 60 years after its premiere, Oklahoma's groundbreaking nature can still be appreciated, and the Rodgers and Hammerstein structures live on in such shows as Sideshow 1997, Ragtime 1998, and Parade 1998. In an unshort time, Oklahoma hit a nerve with America in the midst of war. It celebrated one country's homespun values, determination, and triumph over obstacles. It wasn't just a flag waver, however. It told the story of honest, three-dimensional characters who had dreams as well as disappointments. The Rodgers and Hammerstein formula worked then and it works today, because while time and circumstances change, basic human values and dreams are eternal. Richard Rodgers. Richard Rodgers, who along with George Abbott had the richest, longest-lasting career in Broadway history, made his debut as a composer in 1925, teaming with Lawrence Hart on the Garnick Gaieties, which introduced the standard Manhattan. For the next 20 years, Rodgers and Hart had a hand in one classical comedy after another, and with their witty, romantic, and tuneful scores for A Connecticut Yankee, Babes in Arms, Too Many Girls, On Your Toes, The Boys from Syracuse, and Pal Joey, among many others, they were the musical engine that drove both Broadway and popular music. When Hart's personal problems interfered, Rodgers began a collaboration with Oscar Hammerstein II, becoming a pioneer force in the development of story and character through song. With Oklahoma, they started forging a path that has become so ingrained in the history of musical that all writers, whether they know it or not, are mimicking their structure on some unconscious level. Wonderful shows after wonderful show followed. Some were not smash hits, but they were all intelligent, worthy pieces. Carousel, South Pacific, The King and I, Flower Drum Song, and The Sound of Music remain among the bravest, best, and most frequently performed musicals. After Hammerstein's death, Rodgers wrote his first show with his own fine lyrics, the highly enjoyable No Strings. After proving there were sweet sounds still inside his head, he teamed with a series of lyricists, to diminishing results, with Do I Hear a Waltz, lyrics Stephen Sondheim, 2 by 2, Martin Charnin, Rex, Sheldon Harnick, and I Remember Mama, Charnin and Raymond Jessel, containing passing glimmers of melodic beauty. A complicated man with as many demons as Lawrence Hart, but much more functional, he could at times be stubborn, condescending, prejudiced, suspicious, and vindictive, but like Jerome Robbins and Zero Mostel, was often afforded a pass for behavior that would otherwise be considered unacceptable. He died in 1979, having made the sound of music of the library Broadway for over half a century. Alfred Drake. With the bravura of a great Shakespearean and a singing voice of operatic proportions, Alfred Drake was perhaps the most successful and in-demand leading man of the 1940s and 50s in plays as well as musicals. After an early featured role alongside other talented youngsters in Babes in Arms, he won acclaim and became a first-class star in 1943 as Curly in the revolutionary Oklahoma, opening the show with "Oh What a Beautiful Morning" and flying in the face of the then traditional opening chorus. After roles in Sing Out, Sweet Land and Duke Ellington's Beggar's Holiday, Drake tackled two roles that cemented his place in Broadway history. Perfectly suited to his oversized persona and lush baritone, the hammy Fred Graham in Kiss Me Kate provided Drake with a prime opportunity to chew the scenery with his fellow diva Patricia Morrison and stop the show with "Where is the life that I led?" One of his biggest regrets was turning down the role of the King in The King and I. Nevertheless, he replaced Jill Brenner on Vacation and received excellent reviews, and he soon delivered another star turn as Hodge in Kismet, winning a Tony Award. In 1961, he played the title role in Keane, which, despite a wonderful score and heroic effort on his part, suffered from a weak book and Drake's lengthy illness, leading to vocal problems and many missed performances, a true anomaly for such a solid, committed performer. After two out-of-town closings, both playing dual roles in Zenda, co-starring Chito Rivera and Anne Rogers, and After You, Mr. Hyde, co-starring Nancy Dussault, he went into retirement from musical theater, coming out only to give a wonderful, understated turn as Honoré in stage version of the musical film Gigi, utterly unlike Maurice Chevalier and completely valid. On the Town opened December 28, 1944 at the Adelphi Theatre with 462 performances. Produced by Oliver Smith and Paul Feige, music by Leonard Bernstein, book and lyrics by Betty Comden and Adolph Green, based on the idea of Jerome Robbins, additional lyrics by Leonard Bernstein, orchestrations by Leonard Bernstein and Hershey K., Don Walker, Elliot Jacobi, and Ted Royale. Musical director Max Goberman. Directed by George Abbott. Choreographed by Jerome Robbins. Production design by Oliver Smith. Costume design by Alvin Colt. And lighting design by Sam Amdors. Synopsis. Three sailors, Gaby, Chip, and Ozzy, on 24-hour leave hit the Big Apple. Along the way, they get involved with three women who are equally interested in companionship. Hildy is a taxi driver, Claire is a prominent anthropologist, and Ivy is a struggling dancer who has recently been crowned Miss Turnstiles. The boys and girls travel from the Bronx to Battery Park to Coney Island in Brooklyn, singing, dancing, and smooching all the way. Cast: Hildy Esterhazy, Nancy Walker, Claire DeLune, Betty Comden. Ozzy, Adolph Green. Chip, Chris Alexander. Gaby, John Battles. Ivy Smith, Sono Osato. Lucy Schmealer, Alice Pierce. Pitkin W. Bridgework. Robert Chisholm. Madame Maud P. Dilley, Susan Steele. The 1940s were a momentously rich decade in the development of musical theater. While Oklahoma is credited as the show that united all creative elements, resulting in the perfect formula for the modern musical, On the Town, opening a year later, introduced a new wave of musical comedy geniuses who would expand on the legacy of the previous generation of talents. The project began at Ballet Theatre at the piece Fanny Free, when dancer Jerome Robbins was commissioned to make his choreographic debut with the company. Leonard Bernstein, following his remarkable conducting debut with the New York Philharmonic, was hired to write his first ballet score, and designer Oliver Smith also made his theater debut. Amazingly, Robbins, Bernstein, and Smith's collaboration took place almost exclusively by telephone and mail, since both Robbins and Bernstein were touring and Smith was working in Mexico. The slim plot of Fancy Free dealt with the adventures of three sailors on a one-day leave in New York City and their misadventures in trying to pick up women. The ballet was so successful it was used as the basis for a Broadway musical. Bernstein, Robbins, and Smith would reprise their roles, and Smith also acting as co-producer. Needing words to accompany for the dancing, Bernstein suggested friends Betty Comden and Adolph Green, then successful cabaret performers, as librettists-lyricists. All five would be making their Broadway debuts. Raising money for the show proved difficult until George Abbott, the legendary producer, director, writer, agreed to direct. Work began, a cast was assembled, including authors Comden and Green, also making their Broadway debut as performers, dancer Sono Asoto, and comic forces Nancy Walker and Alice Pierce. And only 8 months and 10 days after the opening of Fancy Free, Broadway audiences were on the town at the Adelphi Theater in New York. By today's standards, an absolutely remarkable achievement. The speed with which the show was written, rehearsed, and opened mirrored the speed and youthful enthusiasm of the entire proceedings. Besides the authors, there were other notable Broadway debuts associated with On the Town. Hershey Kay's first orchestrations, Alvin Colt's first costumes, along with Broadway debuts of Chris Alexander and John Battles. Comden and Green's first libretto shows off their kilter conceits and bittersweet romanticism, two qualities of all their best work. Even the names of On the Town characters revealed Comden and Green's playful imagination. What other writers, save S.G. Perelman or Guy Bolton, would name characters Pitkin W. Bridgeworth, Lucy Schmeler, and Claire de Lune. And Bernstein brought a brash, modern sensibility to the Broadway musical, mixing hip jazz, modern classicism, and languorous blues motifs. Broadway revivals on the Town in 1971 and 1999 were failures, but the piece remains a favorite with its complicated balance of classical dance, jazz, farce, and heart. A delicate mixture of tones that is extremely difficult to reproduce. Backstage. When On the Town was filmed in 1949, MGM deemed Leonard Bernstein's music too atonal, keeping the ballet music but tossing out almost all of his songs. The only Bernstein songs remaining were I Feel Like I'm Not Out of Bed Yet, New York, New York, and Come Up to My Place. Roger Edens composed the balance of the songs, with lyrics by Betty Comden and Adolph Green. Miss Turnstiles was based on the real-life Miss Subways. This is not to be confused with Miss Reingold. Nancy Walker. Nancy Walker, an eternal comic surplus, made her Broadway debut in 1941 at the age of 19 in Best Foot Forward, where her unique combination of brass and hang hot dog expressions made her an instant smash. After On the Town, she had a great triumph co-starring with Harold Lang in the Hugh Martin musical Look Ma, I'm Dancing. As the unlikely owner of the ballet troupe, her number, I'm the First Girl in the Second Row, perfectly captured her ability to simultaneously charm and crutch. Despite her inability to find a perfect property, she never failed to make an impression, whether singing of her love, Irving, in Along with Fifth Avenue, or wrestling a nightstick as a policewoman, Katie O'Shea, in Copper and Brass, co-written by her husband, David Craig. She finally got another hit as Phil Silver's long-suffering wife in the 1960s show Do Re Mi. To see her priceless stage business as she sat in the nightclub, stood up on her anniversary, was to see the master of the show slow burn, an actress not afraid to use her anger as a comic weapon. Despite appearing in the LA run of the 1972 revival of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, and performing a touchingly understated I'm Still Here at the 1973 Sondheim tribute, she unfortunately never returned to Broadway in a musical, gaining her greatest fame on the television series Rhoda as Rosie, the Bounty Paper Tower Lady. On the 20th Century opened February 19th, 1978 at the St. James Theatre with 460 performances. Produced by the Producers Circle 2, Inc., Robert Fryer, Marilyn Lee Johnson, James Cresson, and Martin Richards. Book and lyrics by Betty Comden and Adolph Green. Music by Cy Coleman. Based on the play by Ben Hecht, Charles MacArthur, and Bruce Milholland. Musical director Paul Gemignani. Musical orchestrated by Hershey Kay. Directed by Harold Prince. Musical staging by Larry Fuller. Scenic design by Robin Wagner. Costume design by Florence Klotz. Lighting design by Ken Billington. Synopsis. Producers on the skid Oscar Jaffe escapes town after the failure of his latest fiasco, the story of Joan of Arc. He books himself in a compartment on a 20th Century Limited, a train traveling from Chicago to New York. The roomette is next to that of Lily Garland, a Hollywood actress who is traveling with her boyfriend, the very, very handsome and very, very stupid Bruce Granite. Jaffe is desperate to sign Garland for his next religious spectacle, the story of Mary Magdalene. To add to his headache, also traveling on the train is a rival producer also seeking to sign Garland, and a certifiable lunatic, Letitia Primrose, very religious, very rich, and very adult. By curtain's end, Garland and Jaffe have reconciled, celebrating their mercurial onstage offstage relationship. Cast: Letitia Primrose, Imogen Coca, Owen O'Malley, George Coe, Oliver Webb, Dean Dittman, Oscar Jaffe, John Cullum, Max Jacobs, George Lee Andrews, Mildred Plotka and Lily Garland, Madeline Kahn, Bruce Granite, Kevin Kline, Agnes, Judy Kay. Harold Prince has enjoyed many successes, both artistically and financially, in his long unsurpassed career in the musical theater. Some shows got good reviews but never did good business, while some went on to enjoy long runs despite so-so reviews. While many received raves and did good business too, but whatever kind of business his shows have enjoyed, one thing has marketed all of Prince's productions: the unparalleled producing, even when he wasn't actually the producer. Fans of On the 20th Century consider it the last good traditional Broadway musical. To be sure, there have been satisfying shows since, but this one had it all. Great material, terrific performances from John Cullum, Imogen Coca, and the truly madcap Calvin Klein in a role that Jack Cassidy would have played 15 years earlier. And a magnificent design by Robert Wagner, not to mention Prince's excellent and precise pacing and staging. Betty Comden and Adolph Green expanded their original play with their inimitable spoofery, their lyrics and book equal to the best of their comedy work, while Cy Coleman's endlessly inventive music kept the score hurtling along. Some critics complained that Coleman's music didn't sound vaguely depressing era, but they were missing the point. For purposes of a Broadway score is to characterize a setting or period while retaining its own unique sound. The music must at once seem contemporary, as opposed to old-fashioned, yet timeless, all the while supporting the characters and becoming a chief dramatic component. Madeline Kahn, as audition pianist Mildred Plotka turned movie star Lily Garland, turned in a performance of wacky unconventionality and near operatic scope. The energy and concentration of an 8-show-a-week run proved too much, however, and Kahn unceremoniously left the show shortly after its opening. The wonderful Judy Kay, Kahn's understudy, pulled a Shirley MacLaine, truly becoming an overnight sensation when she assumed the role. Unfortunately, despite a fine career, the changing state of musical theater did not provide Kay with more roles tailored to her talents. She starred in Oh Brother, a sadly underappreciated show that closed after only 3 performances, and The Mooney Shapiro Songbook closed on opening night, and she soon became typecast as a character actress. She handled these roles superbly, but one always got the feeling that she was constrained by the small size of the role she was given. Prince, however, never forgot Kay's importance to the artistic success of On the 20th Century, and later cast her in another spectacle, Phantom of the Opera. 20th Century was one of the last pure musical theater entertainments on Broadway to date. Apart from the occasional light-hearted revival, Forum, Guys and Dolls, Broadway became a pretty serious place, mounting self-important epics with epic themes. And it was the hugely successful Evita, which Prince directed, that laid the groundwork for such serious power ballad musical theater. Strangely enough, in some ways, On the 20th Century was a precursor to Prince's work on The Phantom of the Opera. Both are operettas and both contain shows within the show which are parodies. They lampoon life in theater as well as celebrate that life. Both 20th Century and Phantom are performed in an over-the-top style, one for comic effect and the other for dramatic intensity. The physical productions of both shows, thanks to the talents of Robin Wagner and Mariette Bjornsson, respectively, help reinforce the exaggerated styles. 20th Century succeeded on all levels and was one of the last Broadway shows to spotlight Comden and Green's off-kilter view of the world. It stands among their very best works, featuring their trademark wit, energy, and zest for living. It may have been the last great Broadway musical comedy. Cy Coleman. Cy Coleman, one of the handful of Broadway composers who is a brilliant pianist in his own right, and perhaps second only to Harold Green and his ability to translate the jazz idiom to the musical theater, made his debut as Broadway composer with the Lucille Ball vehicle Wildcat, working with the gifted yet troubled lyricist Caron Lee. He next tackled Little Me, this time writing a delightfully funny score for Sid Caesar. Coleman wrote his next 2 shows with another female lyricist, the brilliant Dorothy Fields, and in Sweet Charity and Seesaw, he became the master of capturing, through his music, the rhythmic grit and sexual drive of contemporary urban life, further developed in his later shows I Love My Wife and The Life. Just as easily, however, Coleman could drop the down and dirty sound and switch gears to write the operetta-flavored On the 20th Century and jaunty calliope sounds of Barnum. In City of Angels, he joyfully returned to his jazz roots, with the hottest band in Broadway pit since the original production of Gypsy. Reteaming with his 20th Century lyric team Betty and Comden and Adolph Green, he struck Tony Gold again with the Will Rogers Follies. After 40 years, and with a tune stack including such finger-snappers as I've Got Your Number, Big Spender, and Hey Look Me Over, and Nobody Does It Like Me, Cy Coleman was the embodiment of Broadway brass. John Cullum. John Cullum, with the acting chops of Shakespearean and a superb rich baritone, has lent his strong voice and presence to many Broadway musicals. From Civil War-era patriarch to hammy Svengali to modern-day psychiatrist, his range is amazing, equaling that of Richard Kelly and its ability to span eras and styles. After understudying both Richard Burton and Roddy McDowall in Camelot, he made his leading man debut, replacing Louis Jordan in On a Clear Day and You Can See Me Forever. He followed that up with the true flopperoo, the Christopher Columbus musical 1491, which folded in California, then replacement stints in Man of La Mancha in 1776. He won his first Tony Award for his robustly sung soliloquies as Charles Anderson in Shenandoah, and another 3 years later for his Barrymore-inspired Oscar Jeffy in On the 20th Century. After turning down the title role in Sweeney Todd, he branched out into television, starring in Northern Exposure. He returned, still in the fine form and voice, as the venal Cladwell in Urinetown in 2001. Great scores from So-So Shows, Part 2. Here are a few more of our favorite scores from shows that didn't make the grade as all-around entertainment. Charles Strouse and Lee Adams' Golden Boy was a hit because of the incandescent presence of Sammy Davis Jr. The reviews were decidedly mixed, but oh, that score. It's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman, needed a little more edge. Still, the score has many wonderful surprises. Strauss collaborated with Stephen Schwartz on Rags, a show that has its vociferous partisans and detractors too, but all agree that the score is heavenly. Anthony Newley and Leslie Bricusse produced two remarkable scores for Broadway. Stop the World, I Want to Get Off boasted two mega ballads, Once in a Lifetime and What Kind of Fool Am I? The roar of the grease paint, The Smell of the Crowd, contained The Joker, Who Can I Turn To? Songs that are precursors to modern, dreaded power ballads like This Is the Moment, among others. Howard Dietz and Arthur Schwartz, The Gay Life, contains Magic Moment, a beautiful ballad, especially as sung sincerely by Barbara Cook, who also brightened the Sammy Fain, E.Y. Harburg mismatched Flahuli. Please ignore the Moises Vivanso numbers for Ima Sumek. Orchestrator Don Walker completed Sigmund Romberg's last score, The Girl in Pink Tights, after the great composer's death, with Romberg's lush melodies wedded to the romantic and witty words of a very underrated lyricist, Leo Robin. Vernon Duke gets our vote as the best composer of unsuccessful shows. Case in point, Cabin in the Sky, with lyricist John Latouche's brilliant wordplay. Johnny Burke and Jimmy Van Heusen's Swinging the Dream is another neglected score that deserves to be rediscovered, while Mark Blitzstein's searing Juno is Broadway drama at its best. The John Morris-Gerald Friedman flop, A Time for Singing, has a stunning score and magnificent vocal arrangements. In more recent times, Boy George's score for Taboo thrilled audiences. On Your Toes opened April 11, 1936 at the Imperial Theatre with 315 performances. Produced by Dwight DeRee Women, music by Richard Rodgers and lyrics by Lawrence Hart. Book by Richard Rodgers, George Abbott, and Lawrence Hart. Music orchestrated by Hans Bialik. Music director Gene Seltzer. Staged by C. Worthington Minor and George Abbott. Choreographed by George Balanchine. Scenic design by Joe Meisner. Costume design by Irene Sharaf. Synopsis. Junior Dolan, youngest member of the Dolan family vaudeville act, grows up to teach music in New York City. Among his pupils are Sidney Kahn, an up-and-coming composer, and Frankie Frayne, a pretty songwriter. Frankie introduces Junior to Peggy Porterfield, wealthy patron of the arts with a passion for the ballet. Junior convinces Peggy to produce Sidney's jazz ballet, even though the ballet's Russian artistic director is completely against the idea. Vera Barnova, the company's tempestuous prima ballerina, having split yet again with her co-star and lover Morosine, meets Junior and convinces him to dance the lead role in what is now titled Slaughter on 10th Avenue. Junior obliges, but Morosine, jealous of the Junior, hires a gangster to kill him at the end of the ballet. An opening night, Junior, tipped off to the hit, dances and dances and dances until the police can save him. Cast: Phil Dolan III, Ray Bodger. Frankie Frayne, Doris Carson. Vera Barnova, Tamara Jiva. Peggy Porterfield, Luella Gere. Vasily, Robert Sidney. Serge Alexandrovich, Monty Woolley. Konstantin Morozin, Demetrios Villain. A singer, Earl McVean. Featured dancer, George Church. Sidney Kahn, David Morris. Pianists, Edgar Fairchild, Adam Carroll. History was made when Lawrence Hart appeared in the Columbia University Varsity Show of 1915, but not for his memorable appearance as Mary Pickford. Also on stage that day was Oscar Hammerstein II, while in the audience sat the 13-year-old Richard Rogers with his brother Mortimer. Morty took his brother backstage and introduced him to Hammerstein. The team of Rogers and Hart wrote a remarkable number of shows over the next 11 years. 17 musicals produced either on Broadway or in London, as well as 3 filmed versions of their stage shows. In 1926 alone, Rogers and Hart premiered 4 shows in New York and 1 in London, while from 1931 to 1935, the duo sojourned in Hollywood and turned out 6 film scores. Then it was back to Broadway, where before 1942, they wrote 10 more shows and 3 more films, enjoying, same 1941, a hit show every season. Today's musical theater writers are lucky to have 1 show on Broadway. Since the 1996 premiere off-Broadway of his first musical, Floyd Collins, Rogers' own grandson, Adam Guettel, has had only 1 show in concert and 1 tryout out of town. Stephen Flaherty and Lynn Ahrens, writers of Ragtime, a score some consider the best of recent times, have had only 5 shows produced in 10 years. These are talented people, but the simple economies of modern theater doesn't afford them the opportunities to hone and develop their craft. There's too much money on the line, too few creative artistic producers with smarts to go along with their checkbooks, cut back in the budgets of the regional theaters. The excuses are legion, but it's the art and audiences that suffer. Rogers and Hart were lucky enough to get their start in college. And what schools today produce original shows? Afterward, Lou Fields took a chance to gave them their Broadway debuts, and Broadway supported them. Although they were by now Broadway veterans, they retained their youthful spirit. Though their words and music were often smart and sophisticated, they could still entertain a few somewhat sophomoric ideas. This playful quality was matched by Rogers and Hart's interest in exploring the new. Their songs leavened their sophistication and dexterous craft with charm and humor. On Your Toes is a particularly felicitous merging of book and song, perhaps due to the fact that Rogers and Hart, along with George Abbott, also contributed the libretto. Both songwriters were concerned about the problems inherent in musical comedies, where songs and plot often coexist seemingly different planes. They wanted to write integrated scores. It would have been so easy and so boring to write the typical silly mishmash that define most musical comedies. So to keep themselves from getting bored, they tried to improve their craft with each show. These shows reflected the joy they felt in the writing process. While Rogers was often exasperated by Hart's inconsistencies of character, he never questioned his partner's abilities. In fact, it bothered him that Hart didn't have to work as hard to achieve great effects. Rogers and Hart's constant striving toward perfection was a double-edged sword, though. At first hearing, their shows were cheered for the artistry of the songs, story, and staging. But as they moved on, trying to outdo themselves with each project, the older shows seemed dated and old-fashioned. And why? Because Rogers and Hart themselves had educated audiences to accept better and better theatrical offerings. In only one case did they slip up: Pal Joey. There was a show that was a great leap ahead of its predecessors, with its cynical sophistication and ingenious anti-hero at its core. But by the time Pal Joey was revived, audiences had caught up and the revival was a great success. The show hadn't changed, but the audiences had. On Your Toes was a precursor to Pal Joey, even if not in spirit. It was another step in the remarkable revolution of true great artists on the American theater who had started their careers at college and had found people who believed in their talents and supported their dreams. Ray Bolger, an eccentric dancer extraordinaire, trained his rubber legs on the vaudeville stage. With the exception of Heads Up, a 1929 Rogers and Hart show, his career prior to On Your Toes was solely in revues, including Life Begins at 8:40, where he starred alongside future Wizard of Oz cohort Bert Lore, With On Your Toes and his third Rodgers and Hart show by Jupiter in 1942, he rose from sidekick roles to become a first-rank, quirky leading man. His delivery of the soft chew "Once in Love with Amy" in Where's Charlie was the stuff Broadway legends are made of, every evening leading the audience in a sing-along through encore after encore. After turning down the role of Harold Hill in Music Man, his choice for a return, All-American, was a miscalculation. He also found that during his absence from Broadway in the 1950s, audiences had become more sophisticated with the rise of the Rodgers and Hammerstein style of a musical play. And his style of performing, down front and playing out, even breaking the fourth wall, had been replaced by a more naturalistic approach. The reception of his final show, Come Summer, so soared him on the theater that he never returned. One Touch of Venus opened October 7, 1943 at the Imperial Theatre with 567 performances. Produced by Cheryl Crawford, associate producer John Wilberg. Music by Kurt Weill. Book by S.J. Perlman and Odger Nash. Lyrics by Odgen Nash. Suggested by The Tinted Venus by F. Anstein. Music orchestrated by Kurt Weill. Music arranged by Kurt Weill. Musical director Maurice Abravanel. Staged by Elia Kazan. Musical staging by Agnes DeMille. Scenic design by Howard Bay. Costume design by Paul Dupont and Kermit Loeb. Miss Martin's gown by Mayne Botcher. Synopsis. Barber Rodney Hatch is about to be engaged to Gloria when he visits the Whitelaw Savory Foundation of Modern Arts and finds himself drawn to the marble statue of Venus. On an unexplainable whim, Rodney slips Gloria's engagement ring onto the statue's finger and, to his bewilderment, the statue comes to life. Rodney retreats to his apartment, but Venus, in love with Rodney for giving her life and wanting to explore her carnal desires, follows him. Gloria asks Rodney for the ring and is surprised to hear that a statue is wearing it and won't return it. Venus wants Gloria out of the picture and sends her to the North Pole. The police arrive, arresting Rodney for stealing the statue, also charging him and Venus with killing Gloria. Venus arranges for their escape to a nearby hotel. Rodney dreams about life with his beloved goddess in the suburbs of Long Island. He awakens to find Venus gone, summoned by a messenger of the gods and returned to her marble form. The spell of Gloria is broken, and she returns from her frigid trip north, understandably angry with Rodney. Alone, Rodney returns to the museum and looks at the statue with new admiration. His reverie is interrupted by a young girl who looks amazingly like Venus. She asks Rodney for directions, and they go off together. Cast: Whitelaw Savory, John Bowles. Molly Grant, Paula Lawrence. Taxi Black, Teddy Hart. Rodney Hatch, Kenny Baker. Venus, Mary Martin. Gloria Kramer, Ruth Bond. Premiere Danseuse, Sono Osato. In 1943, producer Cheryl Crawford had just opened a success with the transfer of a production of Porgy and Bess to Broadway from her Maplewood, New Jersey summer stock theater. She followed it up with One Touch of Venus, but the road to Venus wasn't nearly as smooth. Costumer Irene Sharaf brought Kurt Weill the novel The Tinted Venus by F. Anstey, Thomas Ainsley Girthy. She suggested that the novel would make a fine musical, with Weill in turn bringing Crawford aboard. As Crawford wrote in her autobiography, it could involve the world as we see it and as the goddess sees it, and allows us to compare the two views, which would of course be quite different. I thought it would have social bearing and also be amusing. And that is as apt a description of Weill's choice of material throughout his career as has ever been stated. Crawford obtained the rights to the novel, and after turndowns by both Ira Gershwin for the lyrics and Arthur Kober for the libretto, hired poet Ogden Nash to provide the lyrics and Bella Spivak to provide the libretto. Crawford and Weill had Marilyn Dietrich in mind to play the title role. Weill and Crawford traveled to Hollywood, where he played a few songs for the star, and they explained the concept of the script. As Crawford described their meeting with Dietrich, We would talk about the show for a while, then Marlene would take up the musical saw and begin to play. That, we soon found out, was the cue that talk was finished for the evening. On a trip to New York, Dietrich visited the Metropolitan Museum of Arts and draped herself into yards of gray chiffon, approximating various poses for Venus. She sang at an audition for the 46th Street Theater, but wavered when it came to formally committing to the project. An incredibly shrewd businesswoman, Crawford took advantage of Dietrich's migraine headache on one day and got her to sign a contract. Now, armed with a star, all that remained was to actually write and produce the piece. When Spiewak appeared stuck on the script, Crawford replaced her with humorist S.J. Pellerman. His revision was a lot racier, and when their star read it, Dietrich bowed out, explaining to Whale, "I have a daughter who is 19 years old, and for me to get up on the stage and exhibit my legs is now impossible." After turndowns by several Europeans, the writers and producers turned to All-American Mary Martin. After hearing some of the score, especially the tune, "That's Him," Martin visited the Museum of Modern Arts to see how artists had interpreted the character of Venus. Martin's husband, Richard Halliday, contacted the renowned designer Maine Botcher and asked him to supply Martin's costumes. But the courtier was undecided and asked to hear some of the songs. Halliday, Martin, Mainbacher, and Crawford all assembled in Whale's apartment, where he again played "That's Him." While he was playing the song, Martin drew a chair over to the designer and sang along with the composer. When the song was finished, Mainbacher agreed to design the show and provided a charming bit of blocking in the process. He told Martin, "Promise me you'll always sing this song that way. Take a chair down to the footlights, sing across the orchestra to the audience as if you were just one person." And that's exactly how the song was staged. Martin accepted the role, balking at only one of Perlman's typically risque lines. "Love is not the moaning of distant violins, it's the triumphant twang of a bedspring." But after reciting it on stage and receiving a huge laugh, she acquiesced it without further complaint. In Boston, the show concluded with the Venus in the Ozone Heights ballet, climaxing with Venus's return to her original form, a statue. When both audiences and the creative team voiced their unhappiness with this ending, choreographer Agnes DeMille suggested that another scene be written, in which Rodney returns to the museum to look once more at the statue, wondering why she has returned to stone. Just then, a young girl enters looking for an art class. She is the image of Venus, only her clothes are simple and she has an attractive, awkward grace. She might be Venus's country cousin. She tells Rodney that she is from Ozone Heights and can't think of living anywhere else, and the two exit to the strains of "Speak Low." Oscar Hammerstein was quite taken with the image of Mary Martin. As she wrote in her autobiography, he wanted to write a part for the innocent, eager little girl in white pique blouse, pink polka dot skirt, and matching roll-brimmed hat. He wrote it, too. Nellie Forbush in South Pacific was a descendant of Venus. Kurt Weill. The first half of Kurt Weill's career took place in Germany, in an especially fruitful collaboration with Bertolt Brecht on a series of agitprop entertainments and satirizing and lambasting German politics and society. With the rise of the Third Reich, Weill fled, first to France and then to Britain, finally ending up in America. Weill continued to explore intellectual themes in his musical theater work, mainly with playwrights and poets as his lyricists. Critics called him chameleon-like in his ability to reflect the styles of his adopted homelands in his work, but they failed to recognize that even his Weimar Republic days, he had flirted with Tin Pal Alley-inspired themes. True, the sardonic qualities of his early work were toned down and his music became more lyrical, but at the core were every bit as cutting as in his German works. The Threepenny Opera, his best-known work, was a failure in his first American incarnation, only to find wide acceptance by Mark Blitzstein's English words in a 1954 historic revival of Broadway. His first Broadway show, Johnny Johnson, found his dissonance and attacking rhythms intact. He voiced his interest in society as the injustices of the musical operetta street scene, and in his last work, Lost in the Stars, while he tackled political issues in The Firebrand of Florence and Knickerbocker Holiday, which boasted his first American hit song, September Song. Although Kurt Weill was a gentleman in the true sense of the word, he was quick to use his talents to voice his political and societal ideas. Mary Martin. Mary Martin, a truly beloved Broadway star, basked in the glow of her audience's adoration for almost 40 years. She was never as Sacco as singer, nor powerhouse as a clown as Ethel Merman. Her contemporary and only true rival for the title of Broadway musical demigoddess. Nevertheless, she had it all over Merman in versatility, easily jumping among roles. Here a nun, there an ageless boy, now a Roman goddess, and later an army nurse. No matter what she played, she always imbued her performance with her own ineffable brand of charm and coy, Texas-bred humility, and as if each audience of 1,200 people had sprung a surprise birthday party on her 8 times a week, and she just happened to have a show to perform for them. Although she's best remembered for her family-friendly roles and her all-American fresh scrubbed goodness, she began her career as a sly sexpot. After her overnight star-making performance of My Heart Belongs to Daddy in the 1938 Cole Porter show Leave It to Me, she took on her first leading lady role in One Touch of Venus. Martin turned down her share of plum roles in Oklahoma, Kiss Me Kate, My Fair Lady, Funny Girl, and Mame, and had her share of flops, Dancing in the Street, now Noel Coward's Pacific in 1860 in London, and Jenny. But oh, the winners she chose, Nellie Forbush, Peter Pan, and Maria von Trapp, any one of them enough to assure her place as an all-time great.